Hi there, I'm Sam Bowman. I recently wrote a report about why the UK has stagnated. Tom Tugendhat invited me in to have a chat. Tom, you wrote a very interesting op-ed for The Telegraph on similar themes, so thought it'd be interesting to chat. My first question for you is, why do you think the UK has stagnated?
Well, it's very much for the similar ideas you've been talking about, actually, which is we just simply haven't invested. And this is a choice. I mean, Matt Clifford put it very well, other people have put it very well. This is actually a choice. We've chosen to be governed by regulations and governed by set standards that are inflexible rather than finding ways through and finding ways that deliver. And effectively, we've gone from the rule of law to the rule of lawyers. And that's really constrained growth, not just in the last few years, but actually in the last 30 or so years. And that's a real problem because we're now seeing the effect. The energy price is here, 60, 70% higher than somewhere like France. It's multiple times somewhere like the United States. That is really holding back business. And all of these decisions are fundamentally coming down to the desire or the absence of investment.
What do you think is the cause of that? I mean, in the 30s, we built, if we built housing at the same rate today that we were building housing in the 30s, we'd be building 700,000 homes a year. It's absolutely unbelievable. So, I mean, what's changed?
Well, I think a lot of things have changed, and one of the areas that's changed is the fact that it's much harder to raise money in the last 20, 30 years. And one of the things that we've seen is the increasing gentle nationalisation of savings. Now, we don't call it that, because actually it's regulation that does it, but that's what's moved our savings from about 20% in bonds to about 60% in bonds. Effectively, that's a creeping reach of government into savings. It means it's harder to raise money. The second thing is we've got communities who are more protective in different ways, and you can understand why, because the public services they're getting are delivering fewer and fewer benefits for them domestically, or immediately rather. And so you see them objecting to the wider project because the wider project seems like it's going to deliver more of the same problems rather than solving them. And I think the combination of the two of them has set us back and means that we're not as committed to what some people would call the growth agenda, but fundamentally to the investment in infrastructure, to the investment in our future that we need.
I agree with a lot of that. But it's not just that we're not investing, as in there's not enough money. It's that the things we're investing in cost an unbelievable amount of money, right?
Yes.
Like Crossrail, second most expensive metro project ever built in the world. Hinkley, and I'm glad we're building Hinkley, but I mean, expensive energy is better than no energy, right? But Hinkley, most expensive nuclear reactor ever built. And so the kind of investment that we want to go into that, surely much more of it will happen if we can get the cost of those things down.
Of course, that's right, but part of the cost is the financing. Mm-hmm. One of the problems that we're seeing is that money has become more expensive effectively as well, because part of the cost that you're talking about there is the cost of finance. So when you look at, for example, rail projects, when you look at the different projects that have gone on in the United Kingdom, one of the things that has increased the cost is the fact that it costs more to raise money. And it costs more to raise money because there's less money in the UK. Now, that's not that the money has disappeared. It hasn't. It's gone into government debt. It's gone into government-controlled assets. And that means it's harder to use it to finance things like infrastructure.
Okay, that's fair enough. But it's not just that, right? It's not just that. Like HS2.
Planning.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
But why? So why was HS2 so expensive? Like, why did HS2... It's a train line. Like, we used to build train lines for... I mean, we built... The Victorian era built train lines for... I mean, a fraction of a cost doesn't even go into it, for next to nothing compared to the cost of HS2. So what is it that's changed, and what is it that we did wrong that meant that HS2 turned into a £100 billion plus project? I take the point about financing, but even if there was no financing risk at all, it would still be wildly more expensive than it should be, or than projects like it would have been in the past.
Well, that's where you cited, and we both identified it in different ways. You see different constraints by effectively by regulation. So whether it's the famous newt surveys that are being conducted in areas where there are and never have been and never will be any newts, or whether it's the different ways in which communities are able to object to every single change, understandably because of the effect that it has on them, and leading to judicial reviews that delay and delay and delay. Because a lot of the cost comes in the delay. It comes in the fact that you start your planning process, but then you have to keep going over it again and again and again as everything changes. And then you have to hire and pause construction crews across the United Kingdom, and that just adds massively to the cost. And it's a real problem because it means that you never get the expertise, you never get the skills, you never get the rollout of technical capabilities, all the way from the guy starting at 18 to the person finishing at whatever it is, 65.
Yeah, I think that's right. That Korea builds nuclear reactors for a quarter of the price that we're building them. And one of the things they do is they do them in fleets.
Yeah.
We do each project one-off. It's incredibly expensive. Yeah. It's also totally gold-plated. We always insist on having the absolute world's best, most exciting engineering kind of marvel nuclear reactor. Whereas in Korea, they just build them safe and they work. And they're much, much, much cheaper. And they build like 8 to 12 of them at a time. And I wonder if that kind of pipeline, I think that's probably true of tunnels as well, where if you, rather than leasing the equipment and leasing and doing it all through contractors, you have a tunnel boring machine and you have a pipeline of projects. You could probably cut costs by just having a long queue of things that we know we want to do.
Well, I think that's right. And actually, this is one of the reasons why I'm very interested in what's going on with Rolls-Royce's Derby plant and what they're doing with small modular reactors. Because, there are many reasons that's a potential opportunity for the United Kingdom. The first is an obvious one, which is that you can plug it near to wherever it is that you want the power, so you're removing transmission costs. But the second is one that's often forgotten, is that if we get this right, then actually what you're doing is you're turning a sort of a bespoke, sort of, one-of-a-kind plant into just a factory assembly line where you're just rolling these things out. Now, okay, you're not quite rolling them out like cars, but you're rolling them out several a year, or maybe even more, maybe even tens a year, so that you're getting to a position where you can not only make them, but you can sell them abroad. I mean, these are sort of shipping container type things. Yeah. That would be a hell of a cost reduction, just simply in the generation of the unit, let alone the generation of the power.
And you can do regulatory approval once rather than every single time. Yeah. Actually, that's quite a good segue into AI and data centers.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know, like, how important, in your opinion? I mean, everybody thinks AI is important, but is it like century level importance?
No, it's completely fundamental. Yeah. Right? It is totally fundamental. Let's just think about what AI is. AI is a way of reducing the cost of thinking. Right. So everything that we do in every revolution, in every industrial revolution we've had, has effectively reduced the cost of manufacturing. So when we went for the agricultural revolution, that reduced the cost of enabling an individual to feed themselves. That freed up their time to do many other things, so they could do other stuff. Look, artificial intelligence is absolutely fundamental to the way in which we're going to operate in the coming years. The reality is that every single revolution has lowered the cost of doing something. So the agricultural revolution obviously lowered the cost of feeding yourself. The first energy revolution, as it were, the coal revolution, lowered the cost of manufacturing. You cite in your report, actually, you cite the manufacture of things like saltpeter and beer and any number of other things that went from being too expensive to transport to being so cheaply manufactured in the UK that the transport costs became marginal, and you were able to sell salt from, I think it was, I can't remember where you cited it. Was it Scotland?
Scotland, the Netherlands.
Yes, from Scotland to the Netherlands, or rather. Yeah. That's a hell of a thing. That you've managed to lower the cost to such a degree. Now, the next thing, is clearly lowering the cost of thinking, and that's what AI does. But AI, in that sense, is also just another lowering of the cost of energy, because, of course, how do you, if you like, pay for thinking? Well, through food, through sleep, through housing, through all this sort of thing, through having people who are comfortable. Now, if you can reduce the cost of thinking, what you're doing is you're increasing the output of an individual human being. That is a remarkable achievement, and that's what every revolution has done before. And so the key connection there between artificial intelligence and between energy is absolutely overlapped, so that it makes it, it's absolutely fundamental. Whoever makes this work for them will be able to stay at the cutting edge of whatever innovations follow, And if you don't, you won't, and it's pretty much as simple as that. It's the same as electrification was in the 70s or 50s or wherever you want to put it, and agricultural revolution was in the 1800s.
So how much does it matter if it happens here? I mean, we can agree that we don't want it happening in our geopolitical rivals, but versus the US, if general intelligence, human level.
So AGI is different.
Okay.
Sorry, the reason. I mean, whether or not you believe in AGI is slightly separate.
Do you believe in AGI? Do you think we'll ever get it?
I'm not sure. And the reason I'm not sure is because I think there's a fundamental difference between AI and AGI. And AI effectively is very advanced pattern recognition of the past. AGI requires a spark of innovation.
Okay.
It's a different question.
And double question, how much does it matter if conventional AI, like you're talking about, is done here rather than being kind of bought from data centers abroad? And then second question, if AGI is possible, or if AGI might be possible, how much does it matter if we develop it here versus it being developed in the US?
Data is national security and AI is national security. I mean, it just is. And your ability to deal with AI, by the way, is not just your ability to be secure in the traditional sense. It's also about your medical security, right? I mean, if we want to bring down the cost of the National Health Service so that it's able to do more for more people, something I think everybody wants it to do, then we need to make sure that those elements that can be done differently are done differently. So, treatments are identified faster, that diseases are caught earlier, that whatever it happens to be that needs to be done and can be done through effectively data knowledge, through artificial intelligence, is done earlier. Now, I think that's a really essential element for every country's productivity. Simply, if you want to make sure that you're producing productivity improvements in public services, you're going to need artificial intelligence. You just do. Otherwise, all you're going to do is you're going to see increasing costs in the data. In the public service, dominating your national budget. Now that's not solvable effectively. So that's the first one. The second is on AGI. Look, if it is possible, and I think there is, by the way, I think there's grounds to believe it might be, but I remain slightly in doubt. Then there is an enormous first mover advantage. And the question is then, if there is such a first mover advantage, what does the second mover get?
So then given that, how worried are you about data centers not being built here, or either because they're being blocked? There was that one outside Slough on the M25 that was blocked because it obstructed a view, which I think is amazing. But then also the kind of broader problem of energy costs, where we wrote in our paper that a big data center is 100 to 200 megawatts of need. I got a message from a friend of mine, I'm not going to see which company, saying, you're so past it, Grandad, it's 1 gigawatt. Those are the, and Microsoft announced they're going to reopen, or they're going to try and reopen 3 Mile Island to power their next generation of data centers. And it feels like we have a few years to fix this, or we're just going to be totally left behind.
That's exactly right. And the reality is, co-locating data centers next to nuclear power stations is going to be the way that this is done. Now, whether those are nuclear power stations or whether it's the net zero turbine that is being planned for the Teesside development area that Ben Houcham is building, that'll be a matter for others to decide. But you will need constant power sources that are able to deliver that sort of generation level, that constant generation that's able to stay level and keep those power stations not just powered but cool. As you know, cooling is a vast amount of the energy use. It's one of the reasons why I think it's Microsoft we're looking at putting some of these data centers underwater.
Really?
Yeah. So I think I can't remember which of the companies. I think it was Azure, the Microsoft one, had put them in a sealed unit and put them in the sea because cooling is so much part of the energy use that anything you can do to keep them cool is an advantage. But look, I think it's hugely important. One of the things that struck me years ago was other countries need data security as well, but for various reasons they're more concerned about it. than we are. And I was talking to an Estonian a number of years ago who was talking about their e-citizenship. I don't know if you know, they've effectively put the entire country on electronic, so you can, everything you do online. And one of the things that they did was they immediately put their data offshore. So they put it in Scotland, they put it in Canada, and they put it in New Zealand. And I said, so why not at home? He said, oh, well, when the Russians come. I said, what do you mean when? He said, oh, they will always come back. So when the Russians come, we want our data to be secure. And so they chose common law jurisdictions like ours because, you know, for all of your criticisms, and yours and mine are shared, which is the failure to invest, the thing that the UK has in spades that it really is very, very hard to replicate is culture. Yeah. And replacing a culture of the rule of law, a culture of innovation, a culture of eccentric idea building is really difficult. I mean, it's really, really hard. But we've got that. The hard thing, or rather the thing that we've got to fix, is actually relatively fixable. It's building infrastructure.
Totally agree. On data centers specifically, I wonder, it's so urgent, you know. I think everything else, even housing, I mean, we'll be worse off if we don't get more houses built in the next 5 years, but it's not necessarily a kind of national catastrophe. It's not a security risk. But data centers maybe are. You know, as you say, I mean, it could be that in 5 years' time, if we haven't allowed data centers and the energy they need to be built. So I wonder, is there a scope for kind of carving them out of the existing system and just saying this is a really special, strategically important project, and the normal rules don't apply?
I mean, I have to say, I think yes, but I think this current system is so broken that the reality is that we need to carve out quite a lot of things out of it. And you know, when you look at, I mean, I'm really struck, for example, by the recent decisions on housing policy, right? So you look at, you know, I'm not going to argue that everything we did was right. It certainly wasn't. But you look at the decisions that Labour has just taken on housing policy, and one of the policies they've decided is they're going to increase the housing needs in areas outside London and decrease it inside London. Now, I'm not denying that there's housing need outside London. Of course there is. But the idea that there's less housing need inside London is completely absurd. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to reward a Labour mayor and, you know, ease the burden on him, and so that he can't be shown to have failed, despite the fact that everybody can see that he's failed. And what we actually need to see is we need to see those decisions on a whole range of planning items taken in a rather broader sense, right? If you meet the local vernacular, if your architecture is beautiful, and if you're achieving greater density, then you should be able to build. You should be able to have the confidence that when you've made a decision, you'll be able to get on with it. Because at the moment, you know, the planning issues affect everything. And you say that's not quite to the same level of security. Well, you're right on one sense. Of course you are, because the urgency of data centers is greater. But if you want the scientists, if you want the universities, if you want, you know, you need people. And it's simply true that where people get together, more ideas are had and more innovation happens.
Well, I completely agree. It's good to hear you say that. I mean, actually, I didn't expect for you to be more bullish on housing than me here, so that's nice. On the point actually about London, what's so crazy to me about moving the target is that their justification for that, for reducing London's target, is that London has under-delivered over the last 10 years. So they're rewarding failure. Everywhere else actually has delivered that. I mean, I'm not a big fan of housing targets, and I'm kind of interested in, you know, to me, housing targets are a symptom of failure, that you haven't got the underlying mechanisms right. Like you should have underlying consent mechanisms so that local communities see benefit when housing comes near them and want housing to be near them, because it improves the character of the area, not hurts them.
So, well, first of all, population density does improve public benefits. I mean, you and I both know that one of the densest parts of housing in the United Kingdom is Mayfair. Yeah. Right? I mean, it's quite popular. You know, and some very, very good housing development done in Kings Hill is very dense, but immensely popular. They're beautiful houses, they're well built. And because they're dense, you have services nearby, right? You can have buses, you can have schools, you can have shops and other sort of services, because there's the density of population to maintain it. When you build spread out, then that's where you get problems. And the truth is that, you know, the same is true for other infrastructure services. When you build properly, when you build well, when you develop those services, you actually improve the value of the homes and the assets nearby. You don't decrease it. And so we've got to make sure that we're having a better argument on this and a better discussion on this, because there's a perception, understandably, that if you build near a house, then the value of that house is diminished. Actually, if you build well near that house, then the value of that house could easily be improved. And that's where we need to be having this conversation better, because unless we get that balance right, all we're going to see is we're going to see greater fracturing of the United Kingdom, and we're going to see real pinch points on individuals around the country.
And you think we should be building more in London specifically?
Well, I think we should be looking at much greater density, and London's one, actually. One can go around the country. Stoke-on-Trent keeps asking for more houses. Leeds, Sheffield, Manchester. There are communities and towns that have a real need for greater housing and are able to deliver it. And if this is where I think that we've got the incentive wrong. If the central government were able to trust local government to make decisions, and the local government were able to retain some of that gained improvement through, whether it's through local taxation, through business tax, through whatever it is, you'd see a greater incentive to deliver. Because the truth is we've almost done away with regional competition in the United Kingdom. Yes, we have regional mayors, but they have very limited powers. And the reality is that they're then able to do very little with the monies that they retain. So you don't see that competition that delivers.
I think that's a big reason we haven't had any prisons built for years as well, because it used to be that if you were a local authority that had a prison built in your area, you'd get a huge business rates uplift from that. So there would actually be a reason to allow things like prisons and data centres to be built. Then, after the Second World War, we centralised everything. All of the revenues went centrally and then were redistributed outwards. We slightly changed that. And actually, I think the coalition tried to fix it, didn't manage to.
So one of the most interesting things I saw in government in the last 20 years was when George Osborne was talking about devolution to Manchester. And he clearly intended this to be the first step of a process of devolution, and spoke about devolution of healthcare and social care and seeing if they could get it together. And one of the things that he was talking about was the wider experimentation on how do you deliver care properly, how do you deliver social services properly in a centralised state. And his view, and I share it actually, is that you experiment, you see what works in different places, and you learn off each other. What I think is a great shame is that we haven't pushed that further and enable greater devolution into other areas, because it's certainly true that you would, if you're the Mayor of London or the Mayor of the West Midlands or the Mayor of Manchester, you have a huge responsibility to see what you can deliver better for your community. And you can see actually that it can be done by looking at Teesside. I'm looking at what the Mayor of Teesside has done. The Redcar Steelworks was a complete basket case. I mean, it was utterly broken. And a very, very toxic piece of land as well, so very difficult to reuse. And he demonstrated that partnership between the state and the private sector can effectively enable enormous amounts of industry and investment. But it requires that partnership. Now that's what we need to see.
It does bring you back, though, to energy costs. I mean, energy to me feels like and I think people are starting to talk about it, but our electricity output is 2/3 of France's, about 2/3 of Germany's, and 1/3 of America's. And prices can be a bit misleading. France's manufacturing sector is not that big. Energy is very cheap. There are other factors at play there, but just actual electricity output, I think, is a really good proxy for what's going on and how much of this activity is happening. And since the early 2000s, electricity output's been falling in the UK, and I find this kind of bizarre that this isn't a bigger story. So how do we change it?
Well, this is where we get to. I mean, we've touched on nuclear. I think nuclear is fundamental to it. I think, we are quite rightly committed to net zero. The key word is there, net. It's the work that we've done on carbon capture and storage is absolutely fundamental. The way in which we have, developed hydrogen is really important. But it really does require also the planning investment that goes with it, because otherwise we're frankly down a race to the bottom. I mean, what's pretty extraordinary is to hear the Green MPs in Parliament advocating for renewable energy and objecting to all the infrastructure required to deliver it. Well, they're effectively arguing for the Stone Age. I mean, you know, this is not a sustainable model of growth. And you know, one of the problems we've got is we haven't always been, frankly, as honest as we need to be. If you want growth, if you want hospitals, if you want the public services, if you want the defence, if you want the industry, you need power. You just do. And if you're not willing to build power, then you have really misunderstood how it is that you're able to deliver goods and services across the country. You simply can't do it. And so one of the things that we need to do as a government, you know, one of the things I'm committed to doing as leader, is to making sure that we actually invest seriously in this country. Like really seriously, look at the public infrastructure, look at the areas where we can partner, look at the areas where we can change incentives, so that we actually achieve the results we need, because otherwise we're going to be going round and round and round again with a similar sort of Hinkley Point, you know, objecting, putting some sort of speaker underwater in order to scare off a dozen fish. I can't remember what it was now, but it was something like this, something almost...
Stop fish from being sucked into the cooling,
which there was no evidence that they would be.
But also, if they were, I mean, we do kill a lot of fish just to eat every year. It's not like fish dying is a big priority.
Well, it's also, the great irony is, of course, you know, the carbon emissions from the whatever it is 7 or 10 year delay is going to do more damage. I mean, it's completely absurd.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think about wind and solar. I think that they have a role, but I think that a lot of their costs are not very visible, and there's this kind of meme that wind and solar are really cheap, and all we need to do is build them, which isn't true. You know, we're massively subsidizing wind and solar directly through things like contracts for difference, and also through things like the grid connection, where you know you have to overbuild in terms of how much you're actually getting for solar, because on the odd day that it does produce as much as it says it can, you have to make sure you can actually take that away. Otherwise, things will go very badly wrong. Now, I don't have a view on whether we should or shouldn't do this, but I do think it would be nice to be able to see all of the costs and actually compare them with things like nuclear, because I think nuclear might end up being a lot less expensive than it looks if we compare it to the true cost of things like wind and solar.
So first of all, I think nuclear is not only cheaper but safer than most people recognise. I mean, if you look at Germany's opt-out of the nuclear industry when it was about a decade ago, and then look at the implications for their coal burning, and see the number of deaths by lung disease because of pollution, there's no comparison. I mean, there's literally no comparison. Nuclear is just much safer than coal, and there's absolutely no question about it. Whether or not it's safer than solar or wind is a different question. One of the things about wind is, look, I think both of those technologies are important as part of a mix, but the truth is, as you rightly say, you need a base load. You need something that's able to produce, and you also need something that's able to produce in a way that's not only environmentally but socially dependable. And frankly, given that almost all of our solar panels are made to some degree in China, it raises real questions as to whether or not you're comfortable with having prison labour, or in some cases slave labour, producing goods that you then rely on. I mean, there's a reason why in the 1800s sugar was very often sold in red bowls. It was to remind you of the blood of the slaves that had produced it. What is the similar symbol that we should have on solar panel? I mean, it's a real question. What are we asking people to do? What are we asking people to use? Now, it's true we can find, we need to find better ways of doing that. Now, and that's where I'm very interested in what we can do in the nuclear industry, because that's the real opportunity.
On China and on imports from China, actually this relates very well to net zero. Electric vehicles, I think, are the obvious. Yeah. I think I know your view, and I'd like to hear in more detail, what you think, how you think we should treat, BYD cars coming in, but also what do you think are the trade-offs? Like, what's if China is producing electric vehicles and we've decided that we must transfer over to electric vehicles in 10 or 15 years, or however long it's going to be, something's got to give there, right? So what do you think the trade-off is, and what cost do you think we should be willing to bear for what I think? I mean, please tell me what your view is on cars, because I don't want to assume. Well,
look, I mean, the challenges with these vehicles is that they're not just vehicles. The principal element of them is the battery. 80% of battery technology is currently made in China. Now, there's a lot of people who at various different points have objected to the fact that we're dependent for energy needs on the Middle East or on the United States or on other countries. But for those, we're dependent, 10, 15, 20% on various different places. For China, it's 80%. That's a huge dependency. Now, whatever you think your sovereignty is, your ability to travel and your ability to, to power your future surely is a strong element of that. And I'm deeply concerned by what it is that the implications of the electric vehicle revolution in that sense will do. Now, I'm nothing against electric cars, you can build them here, fantastic. But then you need to be able to build a huge amount more of the battery technology outside China, or at least have the ability to swap it out, because at the moment what you're doing is you're building in dependency and an erosion of sovereignty in a state that is extremely hostile and has become more hostile over the last decade towards our views and our freedoms. Now that's a real problem, and so we need to think very hard about what it is that we do.
But then what's the cost? Right, so building an electric car here is an electric car made in the UK would be far, far more expensive than one made in China. If we're also saying people must transfer over to these cars and they have to be built in the UK or built in a friendly country, are we basically just saying you must spend much, much more than you have to because we have these security concerns about China and because we think net zero kind of has to be achieved in this way?
Well, the cost comes in different ways, right? So the reason that BYD and other cars are being sold so cheaply is because there are hidden subsidies within the system. Right? We know that. We know that the BYD vehicles or any Chinese vehicles are not being sold at full market rates. And they're not being sold at full market rates because the companies get energy breaks, they get labour breaks if they're using prisoners in Xinjiang, they get breaks in terms of the way in which they're able to access technology, and of course they get the added break that the Ministry of State Security helps Chinese businesses by a massive amount of industrial espionage, and so steals technology that they don't have to pay to develop. And the combination of all that massively reduces the cost of production of goods. Now, against that, yes, you're right, it's very hard for manufacturers in the UK or indeed anywhere else in the world to compete. That of course is true. But it's also true that if we're willing to tolerate that, then we're effectively saying that no UK business will ever be viable. Now, I don't think that's something that we'd like to say. I think we need to protect our industry. I think we need to protect our ability to produce and to manufacture goods, because otherwise we're effectively sacrificing our entire future in order to get cheap cars. Now, I don't think that's a trade that anybody would want to make.
Protect it how? With tariffs?
Well, there's various ways. I mean, the Americans and the Europeans are looking at tariffs. There's more that we need to do in terms of encouraging production at home, and we've just been speaking about some of it, whether that's liberalising planning rules so that you can actually build battery plants here in the United Kingdom at a rate that is actually viable, whether it's about partnering with allies around the world, so with the United States, with the European Union, with Australia, with others like that, and in fact, of course, with India, to make sure that we're able to manufacture and develop technologies that we can share on an equal basis based on the rule of law rather than the rule of force.
So, to be clear, the tariffs are applying to all imports, so cars from the US and Europe as well, or just to ones from China?
No, I'm not making a tariff commitment now. I'm just saying that there are various ways in which other countries have dealt with it.
But those are much bigger economies than ours. It's not inconceivable that the US could develop the supply chain needed for batteries, electric vehicles, and so on. We're 66 million people. We're a much, much smaller country, and I don't think the UK, certainly not for a very, very long time, can ever have thought of itself as large enough as part of a global economy to produce the things domestically that we need to be able to actually consume reasonably.
No, and the UK very rarely has done so. What we've done is we've been a trading nation that has partnered with others in different ways in order to make that happen. And I see absolutely no reason to imagine that we won't be able to do so again. The reality is France is producing some form of electric vehicles. Admittedly, their battery manufacturer is almost entirely Chinese still. The United States is producing differently. Australia is producing differently, and finding different. Japan, of course, is producing differently, and finding different ways in which we fit into a globalized network is exactly what the UK has done for 200 years. It's a very long time that we've been doing that. That's what I'm talking about, being part of, not simply being dependent for exported goods from China.
You were very positive about, you were very supportive about full expensing before it happened, long before it happened, I think.
Yeah.
I think that seems to be working. Do you think there are other kinds of measures? I mean, what's your take on full expensing so far? But
yeah, I mean, look, it is working. I mean, what we're seeing is we're seeing greater corporate investment into the future, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. We're seeing businesses actually making a decision to commit to investing in greater productivity in a way that will actually deliver for everyone. And what we're also seeing is, this is a direct, forgive me, let me start that again. This isn't direct change to one of the things you've always been able to expense is, of course, salaries.
Yeah.
This means you can develop goods. Now, if you want to do many things, like if you want to reduce migration, if you want to increase opportunity, you need to be making sure that you're investing, and this is one of the reasons why I think it's absolutely essential we get it right. I think going forward, I'd like to see much greater support of apprenticeship schemes. It's one of the things that I think that we haven't got right effectively. What we've done is we've said that if you go to university, the full burden of that university cost will fall on the individual. But if you do an apprenticeship, then that cost will be split between the business and the individual. And a bit the state. So we haven't got that balance right, and it means that many people are making choices based on a financial outcome rather than what's actually better for them or better for their industry. And I think that's an area where we need to be looking again.
the theme of the report that we wrote last week was a lot of the investments that we need to make are banned. And I think, we talked a lot about things like planning and stuff like that. The fundamental problem, though, is that there are political obstacles to all of the deregulations that we both want to do.
Yeah.
People don't like the idea of housing near them. People don't like the idea of a nuclear power plant near them. And we can kind of leave it at this. Like, what can we do to make building again something that's politically popular and not just a thing that we talk about but then can't actually do in government?
So politics is about the alignment of incentives, right? What is it you get? If all that you get for a new house next to you is you get greater congestion and a longer queue in the GP surgery, of course you're going to be against it. If what you get is you get cheaper goods, better goods, and an uplift in your lifestyle, you'll be in favour of it. And at the moment we haven't got that alignment right. So for example, in France, one of the things that you get if you live near a nuclear power station is you get free electricity. So depending on how close to the power station you live, you either get 100% or 50% or whatever it is. So you get a range of offsets. In other areas, there are places where when you've built a house, when you build homes, the land value increase is shared not just with the owner, but is actually shared with the neighbouring homes. There's various ways of looking at it, and it's certainly true that if you look at the way in which developments have been made, you can demonstrate this. I mean, the King was laughed at when he first started designing Poundbury, and a lot of people were hugely critical on the grounds that it was pastiche or various different reasons. He's demonstrated that you can not only build a new housing estate, which is, I think, it's about 4,000 homes. I think there's maybe around that. You can build a new housing estate. You can build it beautiful. You can build it in such a way that the value of the homes goes up, and you're actually making an improvement to the local area in a way that everybody appreciates. What we've got a problem with is the fact that so much public housing that is built today is built in ways that diminishes the beauty of the local area, because it's not something that people want to be surrounded by, and it doesn't bring the goods and services with it, because exactly as to your point, the infrastructure obstacles are so great. So we need to be making sure that when we're building, we're making sure that the obstacles get out of the way so that we can deliver the infrastructure improvements.
Right. Thanks for your time, Tom.
Thank you.